Mish. Hey, today we're doing the first orc video on this channel. That feels really bizarre to say, considering I really do love the orcs. But I figured for this episode of Old School, we're going to be taking a look at one of my favorite models from the Rogue Trader era. This, of course, being the Tinboys. Now, like the first episode of Old School, what you can expect is I will talk about the miniature itself, the history, and I'll show you exactly how I paint it. And for this special piece of orky engineering, I decided to go for the Lamenters, to really embody that old school spirit. But before we get into it, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share it with a friend, and if you really dig it, consider becoming a channel member. For just $3 a month, you get to see my videos early, and for $5, you get access to a weekly Q&A, in which I will showcase your miniatures. Additionally, you also get exclusive roles and channels within the Mish Discord, you get to see some sneak peeks, and it just really helps the channel. Just want to say a huge thank you to my channel members. You guys are amazing. And if you're interested in anything Wargames Atlantic related, especially Quor, the Fidwogs are out by the way, you can use my affiliate link down below, and you can plug in my discount code MISHMASH5% to save 5% on your purchase. As a small YouTuber, I cannot begin to tell you how much this helps me out. But enough of the promotional stuff, let's get to the lore of this mini. So what exactly are Tinboys? Well, Tinboys are actually robots. According to 1991's Here We Go, the Tinboys are actually robots created to mimic all forms of orky enemies. This being Eldari, Space Marines, and the Squats. Essentially, they are caricatures of each species, if you can't tell. And apparently they work via radio operation. Mech Boys and Mechaniacs are able to control the Tinboys from afar, and I think that's mainly why these units died out. See, even in the old codexes, these guys were kinda niche in terms of use. You could also argue that they are racial caricatures, but I don't know. It's aliens depicting other races of aliens, so I don't really think it fits the same profile. Though I do gotta say, some of the glyphs are definitely interesting. But, okay, getting back on topic. The model I'll be painting today and showcasing is the Space Marine, or the Beaky Tinboy. As I kind of mentioned, at least anecdotally to my knowledge, these guys are a niche of a niche of a niche. And as a result, they're kind of hard to find. I do plan on collecting all three of them, including the Runtbot, which is also a very cool and niche figure, but overall, this figure is my favorite of the bunch. 0671/4, the Marine Tinboy, was made by Kev Adams in 1990. The common practice during the Rogue Trader days was to have basically one designer responsible for each faction. So you can thank Kev Adams for some of the greatest designs of all of 40k. As I can confidently say, he nailed the orky design from day one. Now, like I mentioned in the previous episode regarding the Emperor's Children Marine, I want to go over the rarity of this figure. Though the Beaky may be my favorite, it seems as if this one is not nearly as sought after as the rest. The Eldari Tinboy is exceptionally difficult to get my mitts on. But for the Beaky Boy, I would say on average, the cheapest I could find him is around 40 bucks American. Considering this is a collector's piece that is older than a good percentage of my audience, not too bad considering the prices nowadays. But rambling and trashing GW aside, I think it's time I show you the paint list and we get to actually painting this guy up. Now, like I stated previously, I'm painting this guy like a Lamenter, so to be more blunt, this is technically a Lamenter's painting guide. Whatever. Just means that we need more orkiness on the channel. I don't think you guys will complain about that. Now to start out our Tinboy, I'm priming him using German Panzer Grey from Vallejo, and I'm giving him a nice coat over top using some bold titanium white from Proacryl. Normally for yellow, it's best to undercoat using a more warmer color, such as a ivory of sorts. But the Lamenters have always bordered on an ice yellow to a mustardy yellow, so going for white was a better safe than sorry option. Imperial Fist is basically a mustard yellow, so having that white undercoat makes sure that it doesn't go too warm. Also, you notice I'm leaving one of the pauldrons blank, and this is another reason why I used white. We can use this to our advantage for the checker patterns later on. But once I was happy with the application of the yellow, I would then start painting the gauntlet using a mixture of ball red mixed with a little bit of Flesh Terror's red. I really wanted to go for that classic bright red you see in a lot of the heavy metal style miniatures from the era of Rogue Trader. It's definitely a bit of a staple, and it just bounces off the yellow so well. It creates a lot of visual interest, hence why it was so popular. However, I'm going very slow with my application as I don't want any strays of this red to flick onto the yellow. But once I was happy with the red, I'd begin base coating all the metallics of the model. It's not the most interesting part of the painting job, but it's necessary. To do so, I'm just using some Black Legion and Warm Brown from Acryl along with some Satin Black. I especially want to focus this color onto the combi weapon, or the plasma cannon. I'm not really sure what it's supposed to be, actually. But I really want to keep this as a proper black, not a metallic. I'm also going to be base coating the eyes using this mixture as well. Again, I want to be very, very careful when applying this. Getting this on the yellow kind of sucks. It's not fun to clean up. It's not that difficult, but might as well avoid it if we can. But now that all the main colors are accounted for, I can start prepping for painting the pauldron. And let me tell you now, this went through so many different renditions and how I wanted to go through with this. I started with the pencil on the white, did not like how it looked, and I thought maybe I should just do a decal. And then the universe decided that all my decals needed to fail. And no, I didn't use any decal softener, I didn't use any medium, I used plain old water. And this decal completely fell apart on me, so I decided to completely brute force the checkers. You can see that I did actually try the pencil method, but it didn't really look good. So I'm basically just using it as a very, very loose outline, and I'm freehanding all these checkers like a maniac. It's really not as difficult as it seems. It is kind of a messy way of going about it, but at the end of the day, he's an orc. For the main color of the checkers, I'm just using satin black, it's nothing fancy. And that white that we had going on, as much as I'd like to keep it intact for the kind of Zenithal look, it's just something that I had to live with in terms of not keeping intact, so I decided to paint them in using some Ghost Gray from our Vallejo. This color is one of my favorites to begin with, and it's not quite a bright white, it's that perfect mix of a bright, bright gray. As you can see, I'm basically just going in and out and resketching these checker patterns to a right size, just so I can make sure that they actually line up. Above everything else, it's maybe not the most structured way to paint checkers, but it works. Might be convoluted, may not be the best way to paint them, but results speak for themselves. And once I'm really happy with how the designs turn out, I decided to use the white as the main color of the checkers. What I mean by this is the chips in the armor and the paint are mainly going to be white chips rather than black chips on the white. I think this way it's easier to get away with using white over the black. It probably would look fine if I used some black chips on the white, but I think it's easier to just follow one or the other. Now that the white is complete, I'm going to be using a little bit of Cassandora yellow on the yellow armor, and this is a very light application, it's quite watered down. I was going to be selective, but I do think it looks better to use this over the entirety of the yellow just to tone things down. I don't want to use too much though. I will do some extra shading as the model progresses, as I did feel that this singular coat was not quite enough, but it's a good start. While that dries, I began painting the plasma gun case using a mixture of mahogany from Acryl and a little bit of dragon red from Army Painter. This is a wet blend, you don't really have to do it, I just think it looks really cool, and the wet blend style is kind of a staple of the Rogue Trader era. It was mostly just because I thought it would be fun. I don't know how I feel about painting it this way after using a red color on the fist, but I think it works. Now for the sharper highlights, I'm using the same mixture, but I'm actually introducing a little bit of warm yellow, just for the edges of the highlights. This really makes it stand out. Again, one of my favorite parts of the heavy metal Rogue Trader style is those orangey reds. You just can't beat them. But once I was happy with the plasma gun, or the plasma caster, the combi weapon, oh Jesus, I don't know what to call this thing, I decided to start painting the yellow using a mixture of warm yellow and white, this being bold titanium white. This color really does work well for what I'm going for. Again, it kind of brings it back to that more icy yellow mixture with the mustardy yellow that the Lamenters kind of have off and on, and I think overall this is my favorite part of the painting process. Yellow is just kind of a fun color once you start really understanding how it works. And I do gotta say, I think it's all the more a shame that the Tinboys are no longer a thing, because this is a great way to learn how to paint Space Marines. There's just so much extra room to work with. But taking a little detour from the yellow, we're going back to the red, and we're going to be shading it using a little bit of Carroburg Crimson. To be clear, I'm not working this onto the gun casing, this is just for the fist and the knee pad. The gun is supposed to be more of a orangey red, the other reds are supposed to be more of a cherry red. Now while the Careberg dries, I'm going to be applying just a little bit of bronze and dark silver to all the metallic areas. The bronze will be focused more on the electronic bits of the figure. I actually focus this as well onto the little power node on the back, while the dark silver will mostly be focused onto the magazine as well as more generalistic mechanical areas. I don't know, I know it's not exactly the main focus of the paint job, but I might as well put it in. Once I'm happy with the application of the metallics, I then decided to paint this little face using a mixture of green and black from Pro-Acryl. I wasn't sure what I was going to do at first, but having more of a lime green in contrast with the yellow and the red would look so good. And it was kind of fun to really hunker down and focus on painting this and making sure I didn't get any of the green on the yellow. Plus, he's not exactly an orc. I called him an orc earlier, but he is a robot. So having anything orc related not have green just seems like a travesty. But with the little face base coated, I then decided to wash over the metallics using a mixture of Battle Mud and Oblivion Black Wash. The tooth and coat shades are by far my favorites, and mixing them together, it just works every time. When applying this, I really do want to be careful as I don't want to mix it into the white for the coils of the gun. It's not really the end of the world if I have to paint over it again, but I wanted to make sure I didn't have any extra bits that I had to repaint. Now coming back to the red, I'm highlighting using a little bit of Dragon Red, and man does this stand out nicely. It just looks so crisp, especially on the knee pad. It's such a slight application and it creates so much color depth. And while I was much cleaner on the knee pad, I did apply this a little bit more shakily on the fist just to create a little bit of grittiness to it. Makes sense, he's using it in combat. But like with the previous episode, I don't want to use too many shortcuts in terms of weathering. I really want to create a new standard for myself for painting old school minis. Now for that little face, we're coming back in using a mixture of green and warm yellow from Pro-Acryl, and I'm just focusing on the sharper highlights. It is a bit of a wet mix as I'm focusing more of the yellow on the tips of the green, which in turn creates all the more color contrast from the main power armor and this one little speck of green. I've already mentioned this in other words a few times in this episode, but man, these bright bombastic colors just scream the 90s. It's almost kind of obnoxious, but in such a charming way. Now taking kind of a weird detour, I'm base coating something I probably should have base coated earlier in the form of the little rings around the boots. And to do so, I'm using a mixture of Retributor armor from Citadel and bronze from Pro-Acryl. This is to recreate the kind of classic gold color the Lamenters use. I probably should have used just straight up Retributor armor, but I just kind of like Pro-Acryl metallics better, so I wanted to make my own mixture. Again, like with everything else that isn't yellow, I want to be careful when applying this as I don't want to get it on the yellow. Now to paint the eyes of the Tin Boy, I actually used a little bit of mahogany mixed with some Dragon Red, and it would create a nice blend over the black that we had earlier, and I would work in some yellow into the brightest portions of the eyes to create that nice orangey flare. Maybe it's just because I've been painting eyes more recently and more frequently on the channel, but I really do think the eyes, the way they're sculpted on this model, lend themselves so well for painting them. It's probably because when we're painting Space Marine eyes, it's on a flat surface, so by comparison, painting on a perfectly rounded object is way more easy. But hey, just because it's easy doesn't mean I can't be chuffed with the work I did. And like always, I'm giving each reflective lens a nice white dot to really sell the look. And I gotta say, I'm just so happy with how this looks because it looks good, but it also really sells that goofy doofiness of old orcs. Okay, maybe recorded a little bit too much on talking about the eyes, but let's be honest, it's probably infinitely more interesting than painting the tubes of the gun. Now coming back to the gold, I'm using a little bit of rich gold mixed with some bronze to create a nice highlight. And for all the silver, I'm using some metallic silver from Vallejo Game Color. This creates a very stark highlight, and it creates so much more visual interest. It's a nice bright silver, and it really sticks out from that nice dull color that we got from the shade. Also should mention I used a little bit of copper from Pro-Acryl on the little goldy bits on the gun. I'd also use this on the little power pack on the back. It just makes more sense for an electrically inclined bit to use copper rather than just regular old brass. Plus, aiming for a copper really opens up the door for more weathering. Just a little bit, not too much. Now for the coils of the gun, I decided to mix a little bit of Tesseract glow from Citadel and some plasma coil glow from Army Painter. Though Data System glow would have the same color as these two, Tesseract glow is a much stronger pigment, so mixing the two together created that perfect mix. Again, I want to be very careful when applying this, and I will admit I probably could have gone a little bit further in detail with painting the glow, but I like how it looks, and I didn't really want to mess anything up, so if it looks good as is, why bother messing with it? Now, I'm really happy with how this guy is turning out, but I wanted to give the yellow one last little bit of love in the form of some Dorn yellow on the sharpest highlights. Sure, the yellow looks good now, but once we apply this, it just makes it stand out all the more. It really does make a difference. And I'm not painting every single sharp edge with this, I am just focusing this more so on the sharpest corners, mostly in a bit of a right angle paint job on the pauldrons, as well as the sharper details of the face. You don't have to go too hard with it. Plus, being a little bit more conservative with the application makes it stand out all the more. If we use it too much, it just looks a little weird. But now to finish the icon, I cheated a little bit. I ended up using a decal of the Imperial Fist logo, and I would paint over it using some Ghost Gray, and I would apply a Lamenters decal over this. Yeah, I did cheat a little bit, but at the end of the day, I really tried my best to freehand the heart and I just couldn't get it right, so using a decal was key. I did end up using a little bit of white to kind of chip away at the symbol too, just to create a little bit of realism. I probably shouldn't have done as much as I did, but overall I'm pretty happy with it. But as some finishing touches for the model, I decided to use a tiny bit of mahogany mixed with some Cassandra yellow, just to create a final shade. It is very watered down, but it's a stronger color which creates more contrast. For this, I am focusing it entirely within the recesses. It is very selective, I don't want to go too far with it. I'm also utilizing the mahogany in tandem with some orangey colors to create some rust streaks. Again, this is very, very selective. I don't want to do too much weathering. This is primarily applied to the little metallic plate on the leg, as well as the rivets on the model to create more of a realistic leakage. Sure, it's an orc model, but again, I want to go a little cleaner with this series. And for the coppery areas, I'm also applying a little bit of dark turquoise mixed with some white. You could just use Nihilak oxide, but I've said this in other episodes, I do prefer mixing dark turquoise with white, as it just kind of gives me more control over the consistency of the paint. Like with the rust streaks, I'm being very, very careful when applying this. A little really does go a long way for this guy. But with those final details finished up, I was left with an utterly astounding miniature by my standards. This is one of my favorite miniatures I've ever painted, not just on the channel, but over my entire miniature painting career. I love this figure, I love how the yellow turned out, and shy of maybe how the chapter badge was finished in the end, I really, really love this figure. It wasn't even just the final product that I loved painting this guy, he was so much fun to work with. And though I do kind of wish I added on some more details in terms of freehand, I think it was best to play better safe than sorry. After all, I was on a time crunch by the time most of you are seeing this, I'll be at LVO, so also taking that into account, I'm all the more chuffed. But with that, I've definitely been flapping my beak enough for one video. If you liked it, make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share it with a friend, and remember to mishmash, kit bash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna, I promise. See ya!